Okay, welcome to the show. I'm very excited to be joined here by John Sims from Enstar and Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, a former oil and gas attorney. Today we're going to talk about energy. It's been a big topic in Juneau. It's been a big topic for Alaskans, especially living in South Central the last few months. We had a very, very bad cold snap in February, which really put some stress on the energy grid. There's been a lot of talk in Juneau this session about being an energy session. There's a lot of bills floating around Juneau on storage, on potential royalty relief, on renewables, and on upgrading the power grid in South Central. So we're going to talk about that today with two great guests. Again, John Sims from Enstar and Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. I'm going to start with you, John. A lot of problems. We know what's going on. It's been decades kind of in the Cook Inlet. How do we get here, and what do you see happening here in the short term?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. So I guess back in 2022, Hillcorp gathered the utilities together, and they said, at this point, we don't have line of sight into supplying and extending existing gas supply contracts. And as you can imagine, that was met with quite a gasp and kind of a gulp. I think there was probably a little bit of complacency that's been going on from the electric utilities and from us as far as our long-term planning, because Hillcorp has done such a fantastic job of meeting all of our needs. But they gave us kind of an advanced warning that that they're at a place where they can't extend existing contracts, and so we got together with the rest of the utilities and really started some long-term planning and some short-term planning to look and evaluate the different options that are out there. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot from the gas supply perspective. We can continue to promote and champion for Cook Inlet exploration and development. We can continue to champion for North Slope potential and a pipeline coming down from there. There's some possible plays in the Nana Basin, which is a little bit closer, but still kind of undeveloped. And then there's the rest of the world. And so, when we look and evaluate these different options, really the only thing that's within the utilities' control as far as making sure that we have enough gas to meet our customers' needs is the importation of LNG. We can control that. We can pull the trigger on that. We can extend and reach out and get contracts for that. And so that's one of the things that we're really seriously looking at and evaluating right now to address customer demand.
Brett, I'll go to you. You've been following this stuff for a long time. A decade or more ago, there was this kind of issue with Cook Inlet. They did this renaissance. They paid out a lot of cash credits, over $1 billion, which helped. But now we're back at this point. One of the options people are talking about is royalty relief, which you aren't very keen on. So maybe talk about the last 10 years and then how we got back to this point where we're in a gas supply issue again, facing a gas supply issue.
Well, a couple of things happened about 10 years ago, Jeff. One is Hillcorp replaced Marathon and Chevron, both of whom had fairly high overhead costs and fairly rigorous standards in terms of the redundancy they needed in order to do drilling. Hillcorp came in and sort of collapsed all that. Much lower cost operator came in and was able to scrape the rocks that were economic to them that weren't economic to Marathon or to not Marathon, whoever.
Chevron.
Chevron and who was the other one?
Conoco was out
Conoco,
there.
thank you. No, not Conoco. Marathon. It was Marathon.
Yeah.
Conoco and Marathon. And we're able to scrape the rocks better and actually got additional production just on their own by being able to lower production costs. And then we had the subsidies that came in as well, the credits that came in to pay them to do that. And that extended the life a little bit further. It allowed them to drill some things that they otherwise might not have drilled. And what we got for that is about 10 years of additional supply, 10 years of additional full requirements supply, where we didn't need to worry about shortages. But now we're back to shortages, and now we're talking about sort of the same things, except this time we don't have a Hillcorp to come in and take over Chevron and Marathon and reduce costs further. Hillcorp's about as low cost an operation as you get.
And to be clear, I mean, Hillcorp is producing the vast majority. It's like 90% of the gas in Cook Inlet is. So there's, and we'll get to that later. I want to talk about some other companies that are sitting on gas, but they're producing the vast majority of gas. And if I guess if they wouldn't have come in, what would have happened? Would we be facing this same problem, but just 10 years ago or 5 years ago? If they wouldn't have come in?
You look at the approach the utilities took 10 years ago, and they were doing the same steps we're doing today. They were communicating with potential import suppliers. And so it's really the only option, again, that the utilities have within their control. We can hope for a pipeline to come down from the North Slope, but we can't drive that project on our own. So you have to look at how you meet demand for your customers.
And I guess there's two factors. There's gas for heat. We need to heat our homes when it's cold. But there's also gas, for example, Chugach and the MEA, they have gas generation where they provide power. So it's not just the heat, but it's also the power for Golden Valley and Mattanus Electric and Chugach Electric. So, what are we facing here in the near term to the long term if we can't provide more gas or produce more gas in Cook Inlet, and we have to either import the gas or I guess if we don't find more, we're going to have to import more. So what's that going to do to the prices of our energy?
Yeah, well, and I think that's why we're here today, right? Is to talk about that. When you look at what's available in the Cook Inlet market, the fact of the matter is producers are less willing to enter into contracts that have firm obligations behind them, and that's the biggest challenge that utilities are seeing. We're the only entities in the state of Alaska that have a duty to serve. The IPPs, the independent power producers, the producers themselves, they don't have that same duty. It's kind of on us. It's our responsibility. And so when we go out and look for gas supplies, it has to be under a firm basis where we can count on those reserves and those supplies of gas to come to us so we can generate power and so that we can send along our transmission lines and our distribution system to warm people's homes. And that's really the challenge and the debate that we're having today. So when you look at or think about how much it's going to cost, we're in the process of finding that out right now. I don't think it's unrealistic to think that it's going to be anywhere from 30 to 50% increase.
Now, Brad, you've been vocally against any kind of royalty relief or subsidy. These would be different than the previous ones where they were actually cash credits, right? These are Representative Tom McKay, the resources chair, said he doesn't want to go to the Treasury. He wants to forego future revenue. I guess what are your thoughts on not doing the royalty relief and what will happen if we don't find more gas in the Cook Inlet?
Well, royalty relief is a subsidy just by another name. I mean, royalty relief is telling producers the state will absorb certain costs. You don't have to worry about those, and so they can sell their supply more cheaply to the utilities. But the state has to absorb those costs. I mean, the state doesn't get the revenue from the sales that it otherwise would, and it's another form of subsidies.
And it's about 12.5% is kind of the
that's the general royalty number out there, state royalty number out there. So it's just another way of subsidizing producers for the state to absorb, not have the revenues that they otherwise would get from the sales. I don't think the state needs to go to some sort of subsidy for the producers or for the utilities to make the market work. The utilities can pay the full price. They can pay the what the state otherwise would subsidize as a form of their contracts. If that's too high, if that's higher than the alternative, which is LNG imports, they just bring the LNG imports in. The state shouldn't get in the middle of that where it's trying to subsidize the producers or subsidize the market.
Now you talk a lot about the market, and I believe in the market, but in the case of Alaska, if somebody went in there and spent a bunch of money and they found the mother lode of gas, our demand in South Central is essentially flat, and right now there's no way for us to export the gas. So does that create a market, I guess, situation inefficiency or a market problem where there is a lot of gas, they find the gas, but there's no reward if they find a ton more, and there is gas, and everybody agrees there is a lot of gas in the
that's an issue. That's an issue we could address, but that's not what royalty relief is doing. Royalty relief isn't addressing that issue. Royalty relief doesn't create additional market. It doesn't reopen the Agrium plant, or it doesn't reopen the LNG export plant. What royalty relief does is just lower the price. And if the producers are focused on royalty relief and DNR is focused on royalty relief, which is what they were in testimony this week before House Finance, what they're really saying is the producers aren't getting the price they need. And what DNR said is if producers get the price they need through the combination of the subsidy and what the utility is willing to pay, the producers are willing to produce.
Now some of this is set, right? You guys can't just charge whatever you want. There's the RCA, so there's regulatory factors too, and what the price you guys can charge customers is, right?
Well, yeah. So I mean, we can negotiate, between the two organizations at arm's length, and then reach a set price based on terms, submit that to the RCA, and the RCA can reject or approve those contracts, which they have rejected in the past. There's some recent legislation. Well, it's not recent. It was back 10 years ago when we did the Cook Inlet Recovery Act, that really had the commission analyze. All right, if we reject this contract, what other options are out there for the utilities? And so when you think about if we were to bring a contract that was negotiated between an Enstar and a Hillcorp or a Fury or Blue Crest, whomever, they would have to think, okay, if we reject this, what are the other options for the utilities? And there aren't many out there. So I think it'd be difficult for the commission at this point to reject a contract that were submitted. It's a challenge, and it's tough to say that this is a free market. I struggle with any sort of discussion about, well, just let the market correct itself. This really isn't a free market.
So if we do go to the market, I mean, the market at this point is basically saying probably LNG imports. That's what seems to be.
Well, if you look at the analysis that was done by the utilities last summer, released last summer, there's a broad array of options they looked at, alternatives they looked at, including additional cook inlet supply, incentivizing cook inlet supply. And the lowest cost of those, when you look at the ranges, when you look at the midpoint of the ranges, was LNG. Lower than
imported.
Yeah, imported LNG, lower than the cook inlet supply, the incremental cook inlet supply. So there are options out there, and there are options that are more economic than other options, and I think we ought to be pursuing the lowest cost option.
For Enstar, do you guys care where? I mean, you just want a stable supply of gas.
Yeah, so I get this question a lot, and I'm born and raised Alaskan, and so I've got a couple thoughts on that. One, I've got the Enstar hat, and then I've got the Alaskan hat. There are significant impacts that happen when you import LNG. It's not just the lowest cost option, right? What happens to the state when those people that used to work in the oil and gas industry in the Kenai Peninsula are no longer working because we're now importing LNG? That's one factor, right? The other factor is, and I've asked this a lot and talked about this a lot, our largest customer is JBER, Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson. If we import LNG, it's my belief and my understanding that JBER would be the only military installation in the United States relying on foreign fuel. Now think about that when you think about...
It's probably coming from Canada or Mexico, is that?
It would be coming from some other location besides the United States. But the thought of losing energy independence for a JBER, for this economy, I think is really critical. And that's one of the reasons why when you look at the legislature, they're contemplating royalty relief, because they understand that there's more impacts besides just cost that impact the economy.
What do you, Brad? You were going to say something?
Yeah, one of my problems is I have too much history in this industry. Mm-hmm. And back in the 1970s and in the 1980s, when we had gas supply shortages, we had imports of LNG into the lower 48. And those imports were mixed in supplies that went to military bases in Georgia, went to military bases in Louisiana, went to military bases up along the East Coast. So it's not like this would suddenly be a new critical issue that the United States would face. The United States already had that back in the 1970s and the 1980s. And the likely importation source, John, you know this as well as I do, is Canada. And so the Canadian, I mean, we're talking about an ally, a defense ally in NATO and in all sorts of relationships that we depend on for other critical factors.
Go ahead, John.
Well, not entirely true. Canada is an option, but the LNG market's worldwide, and so there are a lot of options. The important piece, though, is again energy independence. And anytime you're reliant on a ship bringing fuel in, there are all kinds of challenges that you can have with that.
But Alaska's reliant on all sorts of ships. I mean, we import a lot of our stuff by ships and barge it up here. That wouldn't be anything different than, it would add another product to it, but it wouldn't be anything different than what we already have.
I guess this has been brought up before, but I just wonder, there's a lot of tensions with China, and what if there was any kind of increased hostility? I mean, isn't that a national security problem if we're relying
Absolutely.
on big ships? I'm just thinking out loud, if the ship wasn't allowed to come up, and it's cold, and we need...
Jeff, we're reliant on a lot of ships for a lot of things in this state. If we have a problem with LNG, we're going to have bigger problems with food and with other products that we bring up here that Alaska relies on. So I don't think that's an issue. And it wasn't an issue in the 1970s and the 1980s when we imported LNG into the lower 48.
Well, it wasn't an issue maybe back before I was born, but it's definitely something that the military takes into consideration when they think about strategic locations, when they think about ensuring homeland defense. It's absolutely an issue, and it's absolutely a preference to have energy independence. So, we've seen during COVID, during worker strikes, the impact with a shutdown at the Seattle port. I mean, you can't have those types of delays in infrastructure, in supplies, impacting the military, or, and my preference as Alaskan, impacting our economy either.
Well, I can't envision a situation where we're going to have state subsidies because the military is asking for state subsidies. I mean, if we're going to have subsidies because of homeland security or other issues, then that's a federal responsibility. It's not a state responsibility.
Well, without the subsidies to import the LNG, and these are some bills floating around in Juneau that are probably the only ones that are going to get, I think, maybe traction besides some upgrades to the rail belt system, the utility system, is storage. And so if these ships come up, they have to put the gas somewhere. And there was this issue in the February with the CINGSA, the Inlet Natural Gas. There was some, it wasn't a supply issue, it was more of a distribution issue. When it was really cold, the wells produce, they ask for more, gas. And that was one of the problems. So how much, I mean, I've heard numbers thrown around, but we're going to have to spend quite a bit of money on new storage. Is that right, to be able to store all this gas?
Absolutely, and storage, when you look at not just the long term but the short term, storage is critical. It's applicable and needed for not only the natural gas infrastructure, but also for the electric utilities when you start to think about the renewables that should be coming online hopefully in the near term. Wind and solar is intermittent. It's not consistent. And so when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, you have to be able to draw from that storage to be able to generate power. And today we don't have enough of that to allow the utilities to reliably switch to renewables. And so that's why storage is so critical. And if we have to bring it in from another location, we can't just store it in our pipelines. It's got to be underground. We have to draw from that, similar to what we do today, where Hillcorp produces it. They put it into their own proprietary storage, and that's how they meet contractual obligations.
Part of this is forecasting. If it's really cold, like it was this year for 2 weeks, that's obviously there's increased gas demand. If it's not cold, we're in better shape. But we have to be, we can't not be prepared for that kind of cold weather like we had last or a few months ago. I guess, Brad, on the storage aspect, what are your thoughts about? I mean, we're going to need more storage, right?
We're going to need more storage regardless. I mean, it's not tied to any given source of supply. We're going to need more storage regardless. And I commend the producers and Enstar and the others for looking at things like Beluga, using part of the Beluga field for storage. I think that's a great thing to do. If Hillcorp is accepting of putting its storage field subject to price control, that's fine. That's fine. That's their choice to make. And anything that expands CINGSA, storage is great, and I don't have a problem with storage as long as we don't subsidize it. I don't have a problem with storage. It's going to be there. It needs to be there for any option we look at.
Now, as it sits right now, we wouldn't be able to just today take an LNG ship. We'd have to build some infrastructure to be able to. And I've heard different numbers on that, but that would who's paying? How much is that going to cost, and who's paying for that?
Well, there's a couple different options. The easy answer as far as who pays for it, ultimately the consumer, right? Regardless of whether it's a utility that's making that investment, or we look to a third party to kind of provide a whole suite of the options, from procuring the LNG to the actual delivery up to the transfer meter. The consumer is going to be on the hook for that. And so, it really depends on the option. You would hope in most scenarios that you can use a brownfield facility that's already built and established, and in theory that would reduce the cost. But we might have to look at doing something from scratch to fit the needs of the local community here. So those are some of the things, some of the bigger questions that we're diving into. It's not cheap. That's the bottom line.
I guess just, Brad, for you, kind of big picture, it just, me and a lot of people, it strikes us as strange that a place like Alaska would be importing gas. And I guess I'm just curious your thoughts. We have so much gas in the Cook Inlet and on the North Slope. There's no pipeline, but it just strikes some people as odd that it's almost seems as a failure that a place like Alaska with all this gas is going to have to probably import.
It's a cost issue, Jeff. If the producers in Cook Inlet can produce gas at a lower cost than the LNG cost, then great. and we get the gas from Cook Inlet. But if Cook Inlet costs, which is part of what was in the last year's analysis by the utility working group, if the Cook Inlet cost is higher than LNG, why do we want to pay a higher price for the product? I mean, Alaska's high cost enough already, and bringing in additional higher than necessary, higher than market price supplies, or bringing additional higher than market price supplies online just adds to that cost. So we ought to be looking for the lowest cost supply, not for any particular favoritism or any particular subsidized result. We ought to be looking for the lowest cost and keep Alaska's costs as low as we can.
I guess what would you say to the concept of the state paying, call it subsidies or royalty relief or doing whatever they have to do to create a situation where we can rely on our own resources? That's going to cost money, yes, but then we rely on our own resources to take care of ourselves essentially instead of relying on outside.
Well, there's a real question in my mind about who pays that subsidy, right? I mean, the problem with subsidies in this state right now is the marginal source of revenue is PFD cuts. So essentially what we would be saying is we're going to cut PFDs more in order to subsidize Cook Inlet gas consumers, in order to subsidize another cost of gas supply. We're going to take money out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families through PFD cuts to subsidize this source. The top 20% benefit from that. Industries, now wait a second, industries benefit from that, but they wouldn't have to pay the cost because we'd be taking it out of PFD cuts. If we found a more equitable way to fund the subsidies, that might be a different issue.
But if we're looking at a 30% increase in the price of energy, isn't that coming out of the low-income folks? And so if you can
That's
look
what I was
at...
going to say, the prices go up, right?
Yeah, if you can look at subsidies, not just as a draw on the PFD, but as a positive impact to the economy, as opposed to importing LNG, which hurts jobs, it hurts local resource development, and it strengthens foreign countries. That makes zero sense to me, because it's still having the same impact that you're trying to mitigate against, which is impact to low-income customers.
No, the impact to low-income customers is more through PFD cuts than it would be through paying slightly higher for their energy costs. And the top 20% would contribute nothing to it, John. The top 20% would get the benefit of lower energy costs without having to contribute to the subsidies if we did it through PFD cuts. So we have an imbalance. If we say subsidies, we have an imbalance about who's paying for the subsidies and who's benefiting from the subsidies. If we found some way to balance that out, it's a lesser issue. But right now, we pay for everything. We pay for all the subsidies the state does, all of the additional expenditures we do through PFD cuts, and push that cost off on middle and lower income Alaska families.
I wanted to give a response, or I was going to go back to.
Go ahead.
I want to go back to there's two other companies. There's Fury and Bluecrest, which both have Fury, especially. There's been talk of hundreds of billions of cubic feet. Fury's having litigation issues in Texas. Bluecrest can't pay their ADA loan. They had to get a deferment. And I know you probably can't say too much about this. Maybe I'll go to Brad. But what's the role of the state when these companies, if they can't spend the money they have to spend, and it's expensive to go get it, but if there's gas there, the state has a role in this. Would you agree? Companies that can't produce the gas they're sitting on?
Yeah, no, just a general statement, not specifically to any producer. I'm a firm believer that if there's an agreement in place, and an obligation that producers enter an agreement to acquire leases for the development of those leases, and if they're not doing that, the state should be analyzing what's going on in their realm, and make sure that people are obliging their obligations. And I don't know whether they aren't at this point. That's kind of DNR's role, but it should absolutely be reviewed and understood whether or not people are doing what they said they would.
Now, Brad, you worked in oil and gas for a long time as an attorney. I think you'd probably agree there's a lot of gas and Cook Inlet that's not being currently produced.
The question is the cost.
That's true, the cost. But Fury and the kitchen lights unit, I mean, they're talking about $500 billion. That's, I don't know, 7 or 8 years of our supply, our demand per year in Anchorage or in South Central. So I guess, is there a role for the state to look at these other operators like Fury and Bluecrest and say, well, they aren't doing anything?
I think John's right on that. I think the Department of Natural Resources, the Division of Oil and Gas, have an obligation to look under the leases and see if if they're fulfilling their lease obligations. And if they're not fulfilling their lease obligations, to take actions to either force them to fulfill their lease obligations or to revoke the leases, to terminate the leases and put somebody else in there that will fulfill those lease obligations. But I don't think the state has a role to subsidize unmarket or non-market priced gas. If the cost of developing those fields is higher than the alternative, then the state ought not to be stepping in and saying, well, we'll subsidize you, we'll make it better for you, we'll make the economics better. I mean, Enstar can enter into contracts with those producers, and as we did in the lower 48 at one point, enter into royalty clauses and say, look, I'll pay you your price and I will cover the royalty as part of the price. I will cover the royalty. If that's really the issue that the producers are facing, Enstar can take that can make that solution tomorrow by contract. So it's. I think the economics, I think the cost of supply is a bigger issue here than what we've given it credit for. And I think we're trying to gloss it over by saying, oh, the state will subsidize it. The state will take care of that.
The cost of development of supply. Is that
the cost of development is part of the supply. Producer supply.
Yeah.
Supply the way DNR talks about supply, not supply the way you talk about supply.
Well, you guys clearly have different kind of approaches on what needs to happen, but I think we'd both agree that something is going to happen here, in the next couple of years, even this year. I'm curious your thoughts about what's happening in Juneau. I mean, a few months ago, you were there with all the producers. There was a big joint resources hearing. It was like people were freaking out about the power and the gas. Yeah. Now it's a little warmer outside. There's not been a ton of movement. There is, like I said, these storage bills seem to be getting a little more movement than anything. But what are your thoughts on what's happening in Juneau and what you would want to see happen this session with less than a month left?
There have been some very engaged legislators down there, and there was a lot of momentum in January and February, and the producers were asked specifically what they need in order to develop the Cook Inlet. Hillcorp very honestly said, we don't need anything. We're not asking for royalty relief. We're just going to continue on, keep it on,
Which
keep
is
it on,
interesting
right?
Because the largest producer that's producing the majority, almost all the gas, is not asking for royalty reductions.
No, they're not, and they're spending $250 to $300 million over the next few years to meet existing contracts, which is important. Meeting existing contracts, right? They're not looking to do anything beyond that, and I think that's appropriate when you think about the risk that they have, right? They came into this market with a certain plan to maintain a certain amount of supply that they were sending to the market. Since that time, because everyone else has fallen off and not been successful in Cook Inlet, they've slowly over time ramped up how much they're supplying, and they're now in a position where, hey, this is way too risky for us. That makes sense to me. I understand it. So they're not asking for anything. I think they're just simply looking to reduce what they're doing and how much of the market they're supplying gas to. When you look at Fury, they said very specifically, we need royalty relief. And so there have been a couple bills that have sort of been talked about a little bit. I don't hear as much about that as I'd like to. I think it's important when we hear industry saying specifically what they need in order to develop. I think we should take advantage of that. And then you have Blue Crest, who said we need $400 million.
They actually asked the state for
they asked
loan. On the record, they said we need $400 million.
$400 million more than what they've already taken.
Because they have an ADA loan that they actually can't. They had to get a deferment on because they couldn't pay for it.
Yeah. So when you look at those options, I mean,
it's a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean,
check.
I applaud them for saying exactly what they need to develop it, but there seems to be some low-hanging fruit there. And when you listen to DNR testify about the royalty relief, I think they have a good point. The producer's telling us this is what they need, and they're saying without that they can't develop those resources. So there's really not a loss in revenue.
I'm curious what you think, Brad. I'm not really on board with this, but there's another proposal out there as some kind of reserve-based lending where, I guess as I understand it, the state would loan them the money, and then if they didn't develop it or if they didn't get what they needed, the state would take everything. Is that a real? I mean, is that something that has happened before in your experience? And that seems to me very risky.
Well, there have been lenders.
No, it's from the state.
I'm not aware of the state ever having made an advance like that. But there have certainly been lenders to projects, and when the project didn't go, the lenders have taken the money back. But think about this. What would happen is the state's leased the resource to the producer. It's the state's resource to begin with. The state has leased the resource to the producer and then loaned it more money on the resource the state owns, and then the producer goes bankrupt, and what the state gets back is the resource the state already owned. So that does seem a little bit circular.
But the state owns a resource, but we don't have the ability to get it out.
No, because we've leased it, and
But even if we didn't lease it, the state's not in the oil business.
Well, what are we going to do with it then if we get the reserves back? I mean, if the loan fails and we get the reserves back, what are we going to do with it? The better approach is if the producer can't produce the resource, terminate the lease, take the lease back, and lease it out to somebody else, as opposed to throw, in my opinion, bad money after good, or bad money after bad, since the ADA loan hasn't been paid back. Just keep throwing more and more dollars at it. If they can't produce it, take the resource back.
That's the Donald Trump. If you owe me $1 million, you have a problem. If you owe me $100 million, we have a problem. I'm going to go back to you, Brad. I asked John this one. What do you think should happen, if anything, in Juneau? And does it need to happen now, or can it wait?
I don't think anything needs to happen in Juneau on the gas side. I think what I'm waiting for is the utilities to come out with the next version of their study that they did last year and said the following would be coming out shortly, and come out with the next version and see what the study says they ought to be doing. That was a good study last year. It was an excellent study last year. A lot of data in that study, a lot of ways to dig into the issue through that study.
Is this the chart with all the?
Yep.
The chart with all the utility.
That was a portion of the report.
Okay. Maybe we can pull that one up real quick and just show it. But it's if Trent can pull that chart up, it's the Enstar chart showing all the different utilities. So this is interesting. Maybe you can describe this, John. But the green is it's gas there, but we don't really have yet. Is that right?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, I'll start from the top. So this was, kind of the utilities effort along with BRG, Berkeley Research Group, who we hired to really do step one, which is look at, all right, what do the utilities need? And so when you look at that top red line there, that represents demand that all of the utilities have under a really high demand scenario. So think of this past winter, right, when it was brutally cold. That's kind of similar volumes that we would see from that type of a weather event. The blue line there represents kind of an average temperature season, and then the green represents warmer weather, also with renewables factored in. And so you can see this is one of the challenges that utilities have is there's quite a difference between higher temperatures, warmer weather, and those colder temperatures. But again, utilities have the duty to serve. So we have to make sure that we have that high demand scenario covered. You look at the other colors there, the blue, the gray, and the yellow, and the purple. Those represent existing contracts that utilities have under contract right now. The green represented the best guess that the utilities had is what's available in Cook Inlet. So we're hopeful that we can get gas from Cook Inlet to meet that green section, but we're not able to get gas under contract right now today on a firm basis. Now, if you want to go out and get interruptible gas, the producers will do that. Interruptible gas is simply, if I have it, I'll give it to you if I want to, right? And so we have a couple contracts like that actually in January, or was it December? Anyway, right at the end of the year, we entered into a contract with Fury. This is public information, interruptible contract for $12.50. And then the red represents stuff that we don't think we can get in Cook Inlet. We've got to find it from someplace else.
Okay. Go ahead, Brad. I want to say something.
Well, let's overlay another chart on top of that to sort of look at what we're looking at from terms of cost. There was another chart in the study. We've got it labeled Brad 1.
Yeah, pull up Brad 1, buddy. There, look at that.
All right.
What a great team. Trent and Scott back there.
Smooth.
Great team there.
So this is from the study, figure 11 from the study, and it shows sort of the same chart that John was just talking about. The contract volumes follow that green line. The blue line is sort of one tranche of additional supply from the Cook Inlet. The light blue is an additional tranche, and then the gold is an additional tranche of supply from Cook Inlet. And what is important to me is look at these price numbers, the cost numbers associated with these additional tranches. The light blue, which is what really, you start needing by 2027, if I'm reading this right.
Which is not too far away. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
A couple years.
no, you've got the contracted is the green line, right?
Right.
So the needs start next year.
Right. But the additional supply, the additional tranches beyond what the study group thought was recoverable, easily recoverable from the Cook Inlet within current
Sure.
cost bands.
Okay.
Starts in 2027. And the cost of that is, the study group said, was between $9 and $19. That's a midpoint of, what is that, somewhere around $14.
Mm-hmm.
And then the gold tranche, again from the Cook Inlet, this is why I say this is more a cost issue than it is a physical issue. The gold tranche, the study group said, was between a $15 and $26 per MCF to develop from the Cook Inlet. You can get LNG, the study group said, for around $12 or $12 to $15, a midpoint, sort of like the blue tranche, but well below the cost of supply of the gold tranche. So we need to be factoring in as we go through what the cost of production is, the cost of development and production is from these various sources of supply. And as you look out, according to the study group, as you look out, you see not very far into the future. The gold tranche starts in 2031. You see supplies that we'd have to be looking at between $15 and $26 to develop. To go back and answer your question, what I'm waiting for is the next iteration of the study group to see if they've refined this anymore, and to see if they feel differently about Cook Inlet cost, or if the LNG option continues to be the low cost of supply.
Well, the biggest difference that you'll see is, again, going back to that graph, the light blue there was what we thought we'd have to get over and above what we thought was coming from Cook Inlet, right? That's changed. We need more gas from someplace else besides Cook Inlet because it's about firm contracts, and the producers are not willing to enter into those today.
I guess last thing I want to end with, and I'm going to go to Brad.
Can I ask?
Yeah, sure.
Well, then what are we debating about? I mean, if the producers aren't willing to enter into the firm contracts that you need, why are we even having this discussion? Why aren't we just going forward and getting LNG in place?
That's what we're doing.
Well, I guess I was going to segue to my next question. This is last thing, and I'm going to start with you, Brad. I'm pretty sure I know where you are on this, but this North Slope gas pipeline. I mean, it's not there, but there was this in-state idea 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, wouldn't that? I mean, yes, it costs money. Yes, but wouldn't that solve our energy problems for almost forever?
Oh yeah, at a huge cost. I mean, Jeff, you've got to take into account cost. I mean, Alaska is already a high-cost state. We need to be finding ways to lower costs in Alaska, not increase costs in Alaska. If the if the North Slope gas pipeline had international markets, and they had full subscription for the full volume of what that line needs to be built to do, then yeah, the cost would be lower for Cook Inlet, and it might be an option. But they don't have the international contracts. They don't have the global demand, and trying to build a pipeline just for the 70 BCF on a really cold day, 70 BCF of Cook Inlet is hugely expensive. So yeah, there's gas there, just like there's gas in Cook Inlet. But it's the cost of getting that gas out. It's the cost of that gas supply that's the issue.
John, on a gas pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer that the state needs to do what it can to be energy independent. And so if the state of Alaska wanted to make an investment in a pipeline, I would think that would be strategically a valuable long-term move. Because again, you're talking about 100 years worth of gas that, think about a governmental body that owns the energy resource and can then dictate and determine how much to charge people coming in. They could give a large industrial customer a significant discount because they own the pipeline, right? So the market's not going to support, the local market's not going to support a massive pipeline project. It's just too expensive, as he said. And so that's not realistic. What I do think is realistic is the state could make an investment in their future.
Well, guys, it's been a great discussion. I want to thank both of you for coming. This is going to be a topic that's going to be live for a long time, so I'm sure we'll have you back, and we're going to be talking about this. The session's got about a month left, and there, like I said, there is a lot of legislation floating around. I'm not too optimistic much is going to happen, maybe besides storage, and then also this GRIP or this energy upgrade to the utility system, which would be a positive thing, I think, for
Absolutely.
electric customers on the rail bill. But I want to thank both of you for coming in.
Thanks
Talking
for
to us,
having us.
John,
Yeah.
President of Enstar, Brad, manager of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, and also a former oil and gas attorney that's been doing this for a long time. So I like the history lesson on the 70s. That was a good.
Before John
segue.
was born.
Before I was born.
Me too. I was born in '84. So I turned 40 in December. So I'm getting up there. I want to thank both of you again for coming in. I want to thank our team, and I want to thank GCI for sponsoring us and making live streams like this possible, or actually making recordings like this possible. We're gonna post it later. But again, I want to thank John and Brad for coming in, and stay tuned for more updates. I'm back in Juneau this week, and it's session's winding down. We got less than a month left, and we're going to be watching the budget, and we're going to be watching all these other adjournment factors play in. So stay tuned for more updates from the landmine. And I want to thank again John and Brad for coming in. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.